Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your unholy home for horror. I'm your host, as always, Barry, and today's podcast I'm devoting to a horror film that I'm very much excited for. It's actually supposed to be released January next year, and that is Scream. It's actually the fifth movie in the franchise, but they're simply giving it the title of Scream, just to try and, confuse some people out there. What I'm really going to be talking about in this podcast really are just some of the things I want from this film and some of the things I don't want. I'm a huge fan of the Scream franchise in general. The original Scream in 1996, great movie, love it. And I actually think Scream 2 is a really solid sequel that holds up well to the first movie. Admittedly, Scream 3 doesn't reach the heights of the first two films, in my opinion. It's still a fun slasher film, but it kind of felt to me at that point that the third film was actually starting to become a parody of itself. Sometimes becoming a little bit too meta for its own good. Scream 4, I did actually think was an improvement on the third movie. I know that probably wouldn't go down well with most fans. I'm probably in the minority there, I'm not sure. But Scream 4, which actually came out 11 years after Scream 3, I actually did think was a bit of an improvement. And it was good to have Kevin Williamson on writing duties again. Now, obviously, we're getting the fifth movie, as I said, in January, which I'm really looking forward to. There is a level of apprehension there. I'm a little nervous at the same time for the fact of... Obviously, Wes Craven passed away in 2015, so obviously it's not being directed by Wes Craven. It's a new studio at the helm, Spyglass, but I'm cautiously optimistic, and just, as I said, as a general fan of the franchise as a whole, I'm quite excited. So I'm just going to really talk about some of the aspects that I would really like to see in this movie and some of the things that I don't particularly want to see. And I'm just going to get the ball rolling now. What I really want to see in this film is a good opening. The first movie, Scream, had a fantastic opening. Obviously very much a homage to 1979's When a Stranger Calls. A great opening. It really is an opening that's actually become quite iconic. Obviously, Scary Movie parodied it in 2000. And Scream 2, again, a great opening, in my opinion. It was a scene that managed to be quite impactful. Jada Pinkett's death at the cinema, with loads of onlookers. Unfortunately, Scream 3, I understand what they were trying to do there. Cotton Weary was killed in the opening. It was there to elicit a reaction from the audience, etc., because obviously he was a returning character, from Scream 2. It's just an opening that fell flat to me. It didn't have that impact. It didn't convey any of the emotion that the first two Scream intros actually had, and I kind of feel like at this point in the franchise it was really kind of going by the numbers. Scream 4's opening was very clever. It was very inventive, I have to say. Obviously, it doesn't take itself seriously at all. It does the whole kind of meta, film within a film and a film, but I thought it was clever. I thought it was quite unique. And I enjoyed it. But what I'd love to see is I'd like to see an impactful opening. And this actually gets me on to my next point very shortly that actually ties into this. I want to see an opening where the fans are there and we're sitting there like, yes, Scream is back. I highly doubt they're going to be able to replicate, what the first movie did. The opening of Drew Barrymore, Casey Becker's death, was great. They're not going to be able to replicate that. Certainly not, okay? But to have an opening that proves to be impactful and, Scream's back in full force, and after the very kind of disappointing ending to Scream 3 in my opinion. And while Scream 4's opening was clever, it was inventive, it just doesn't come anywhere close to the first two openings. Now, this gets me on to the next point. I want to see some risks taken in this film. Much to the annoyance of some fans, I'm sure, I would actually like to see one of the three main killers killed off. The character, for example, of Dewey. Now, I love Dewey. I love David Arquette in that role. But Dewey's really there for comedy relief now. Obviously he was originally supposed to be killed off in the first movie and proved to be too popular of a character that they had him survive. I feel like they've played it safe. I really feel like they've played it safe with the three big characters being Sidney Prescott, Gale Weathers, and Dewey. And I would like to see at least one of these three characters killed off. And if that's done via an opening, hell, I mean, what better way to get into... Now, I know this is going to annoy some people because we've obviously come to love these characters. But at the same time, I do feel like sometimes you have to take risks. If the same characters survive film after film after film, it runs the risk of becoming formulaic and very predictable. Dewey seems to be harder to kill than Jason and Michael Myers combined. He seems to have more lives than a cat. It's almost like they're scared to kill off Dewey. I'll be honest, I actually thought that Dewey or Gale was actually going to die in Scream 4. Now, I know with Randy's death in Scream 2, which I commend him for. Randy was a great character, a popular character, but to kill him off was obviously a bit of a gut punch to the audience. And from what I understand, Wes Craven actually received hate mail for that. I believe that's the only reason he came back via a video in the third movie. But I would actually like to see this film take some risks. Just imagine Sidney being killed off. Now, the thing is, I absolutely love Neve Campbell in this role, okay? In Scream, her character arc has been great from day one. Now, admittedly, though, in Scream 4, it's almost like they don't quite know what to do with Gale anymore. With Sidney. It almost feels like her arc is kind of almost at a close. Not completely, but what more can you do with the arc of Sidney? So, yeah, there's people I'm sure that would riot if Sidney Prescott was killed off. Now, Sidney's not my top candidate here. If you're going to kill off any of them three, it's got to be Dewey. Just imagine if Dewey and Gale were both killed. But if executed correctly. It's all in the execution here. Just imagine if the opening to the next Scream film is one of the deaths of these three characters, etc. As I said, we had Cotton Weary killed in Scream 3, but it was just an opening that just really... It just fell flat. It just fell flat to me. So that's what I really want to see. I want to see a risk taken in this movie. I also want to see an air of menace in this film. I actually want to see a level of intensity. Now, Scream, even in the first movie, there's a lot of humour there. It's a film that manages to be funny, but at the same time, it could be serious when it needed to be. The opening scene, getting back to the opening scene in that movie, and kind of the climax of the film between Billy, Stu, and Sidney, there was intensity there. And I want to see that. I want to see this film actually try to not be too reliant on comedy. I'm sure there's going to be characters there that obviously inject humour into this film, but I want there to be a sense of an actual threat that anyone can die in this movie and have a certain level of intensity. Now, I'm just going to preface, I'm just going to say this, and my expectations for this film are not sky high. I'm not expecting this to be the best film in the franchise or one of the best horror films ever made or anything like that. But I want this film to be a solid slasher movie. I want this film to be better than Scream 3, and I'd love if it could be better than Scream 4. But if it could at least reach Scream 4's level, I think I'd be happy. So I'm just going to now talk about some of the things that I don't really want to see in this movie. And there's a lot of fan theories out there. I mean, I actually find some of these theories completely and utterly ridiculous, I have to admit. Just my personal view, though. Just my view. Is that some people have said, Sidney Prescott could be the killer. And I'm like, no, not in a million years. Surely there's more chance of a snowstorm happening in hell than that. I mean, if that was to happen, I'm like, I mean, really? You've completely butchered the entire arc of your character for that. It would make no logical sense whatsoever. She survived all of these films, and all of a sudden she becomes a killer, has a psychotic break. No, completely ridiculous. I think it's the most out there theory. I've also heard, now this is another thing I don't particularly want to see. Now, I'm kind of conflicted at myself for actually saying this, but there's been rumours floating around that Stu Macher, Matthew Lillard himself, could actually be appearing in this movie, maybe as a killer. Again, as much as I loved Matthew Lillard in the first Scream as Stu Macher, I mean, he really knocks it out of the park in that final scene of the film. The whole climax of the movie, oh my god, he really does. And he's just fantastic. But he's supposedly dead. I mean, the thing is, the movie never actually makes a nod to that. There's never actually mention of his death, etc. I mean, he has a television, smashed on his head, and chances are he ain't going to survive that. But there's been rumours floating around, because from what I understand, I've seen some screenshots, and it looks like there's going to be scenes in this film, whether they're kind of flashbacks or not, unsure at this time, is that Stu Macher's house will feature. Some people are putting two and two together, saying if Stu's house there, maybe Stu's in the movie. I don't want to see Stu Macher back. And I kind of hate myself for saying that, because he was a great character, certainly. But, I mean, how do you address the fact? How do you actually, he's been away for so long. What's he been doing all this time? And he's just going to show up years later, over 20 years later, now to get revenge as a Ghostface killer, that he kind of implausibly survived that television on the head. I understand it would be providing fan service. I get that, but to me it would be nonsensical, just completely nonsensical to have Stu show up in this movie, certainly as the killer. But also something I don't want this film to be too meta for its own good. Okay, I'm all for pop culture references and that. I am. Okay, I love homages, I love kind of callbacks and Easter eggs, but at the same time, if there's a level of restraint to them, I don't want to be bashed across the head from start to finish on kind of pop culture references, meta references, if you will. I think sometimes you can try to be too clever for your own good. Now, the first Scream certainly had many horror movie references, etc. It was very clever. It was very self-referential. But at the same time, it's like I said earlier, the movie still managed to be serious. And I don't want this film to veer into kind of too much like all-out comedy. I want this film to take itself seriously. I'm all for the humour. I'm all for the kind of meta to a degree, but I don't want this to be like from start to finish pop culture references. You're not going to be able to replicate what the first movie did. You're not. So don't even try. Just try and have this film in the vein of the first Scream, if possible, whilst at the same time, like I said, not trying to veer down the path of Scream 3 and try to be a little bit too clever. Because another thing I don't want to see is too many Ghostfaces. There's some people saying, do you know what, there's going to be 3 or 4 Ghostface killers in this movie. No, I don't want that. You know, I think we've got to the point now where we expect 2 killers. 3 of the 4 films have had 2 Ghostface killers. Only the 3rd film had 1. Which I still find it highly implausible that Roman Bridger could actually pull that off all on his own in that one movie. But hey, you know, it happened. It's horror. It's very often kind of nonsensical. I don't know, I just kind of feel like we're going to be steering in the direction where almost every cast member, almost every character is going to be a Ghostface. I just keep it to 2. Keep it at 2. I just think if you're going to have 3, 4... it just gets a lot more implausible for me the more people you have in that Ghostface costume in one movie. And yeah, another thing that I don't particularly want to see in this film actually as well is, now they haven't actually gone into details here, but they've said that there's going to be something different about Ghostface in this movie. I'm not quite sure what, because I really want to see the classic Ghostface costume, you know, as it was. Obviously there's been slight variations, you know, on the costumes from film to film and that, certainly. But I don't want to see a big deviation. You know, I'm hoping this is going to be the classic Ghostface kind of costume that we've all come to know and love. And I don't want to see what they tried to do in Scream 3. Admittedly, they tried to do something a little different. I kind of commend them for it. But to me, it was very implausible. And it just wasn't executed very well either. And that was, we're living in the age now of technology, where technology is ruling the world, etc. And I don't want to see this huge emphasis on technology in this movie. In Scream 3, released in 2000, we had this voice changer that could actually imitate various characters from the film's voice. I mean, how the hell the killer was able to obtain that, I have no idea. And replicate voices so perfectly. To me, it was a plot device that I really didn't care for. I really didn't like it. But I get they were trying to do something a little different. I'm a little wary about the use of technology in these kind of movies. In Scream 4, the killer was filming it and stuff, which, you know, fair enough. That was fine. That was kind of plausible and all that. But I want to see Scream going back to its roots. I don't want to see it where there's too much of an emphasis on technology. I don't want to see some gimmick, some implausible gimmick thrown into this film just because they're trying to do something a little different. You know, so that's kind of what I want from Scream. I want a movie that's going to be a solid slasher film that manages to be fun, but also manages to be intense and serious when it needs to be. Now, obviously, you know, we've got pretty much kind of an all-star new cast, in this movie, like an all brand new cast, and aside from the 3 returning cast members, you know, some of these actors I'm not overly familiar with. I will admit, some of these people I'm really not familiar with. I know that Jack Quaid's in there, Dennis Quaid's son. I believe I've got the actor's name right. Or am I getting him mistaken for someone else? He's obviously, he plays a major character in The Boys, which I think is a really good show. That he's in there, and, you know, people are already throwing out fan theories who could be the killer. I don't even really want to speculate, to be honest. I'm going to try and actively avoid all spoilers if I can. I want to go into this film having no idea who the killer's going to be. I don't want to hear rumours or anything like that. Because when first Scream came out, the internet was nowhere near as big as what it is now. You know, things were generally speaking, kept hush-hush at that time. But nowadays, there's leaks all over the internet and this and that. So I'm just trying to avoid everything. But I'm looking forward to the first trailer. Really looking forward to the first trailer that's put out. I'd imagine we'll have a trailer in the next few months. I'd be quite surprised if we haven't got a trailer by, say, maybe June or July time. I reckon probably by July. So, yeah, I'm excited for it. A little nervous, but I'm just glad to be seeing Ghostface again. on the big screen, seeing Dewey, Gale and Sydney back, but at the same time I do feel at least one of them should have been killed by now. But yeah, so that's pretty much it for today. That's all I really wanted to talk about. Thanks a lot to everyone that listened, and yeah, I'll be back again soon. And if you like what you've heard, please feel free to subscribe to my channel, Talk and Stalk. I have a friend and fellow podcaster, Matt. His website is entertainmenttalk.org. And also a friend and fellow YouTuber, Dean Mallison. If you like short horror films and stop motion, Dean Mallison Films, Mallison, and Dean Mallison Stop Motion. So they're worth checking out. So thanks a lot again, and I'll be back again soon.